So just wanted to let you know that we are on our last chapter for Unit 3 Social Studies. Today we'll be covering geography and the world. Remember to follow along using your Kaplan GED Test Prep Plus 2020 book. And just to remind you that you can play, pause, or rewind at any time. So why don't we go ahead and get started with our last chapter in this unit. As a reminder, we will be utilizing the Kaplan GED Test Prep Plus 2020 book for this and all videos offered through the GED On platform. You can find the links below to purchase the book at your local store or online. Remember to register your book at captest.com/more-online for additional assistance. Today we will cover Unit 3, Social Studies, Chapter 5, Geography and the World, Lessons 1 through 6, starting on page 478. Lesson 1, Early Civilizations. During this lesson, we will focus on the people who were here before us, or the early civilizations. The earliest known civilization began in ancient Egypt. The Tigris-Euphrates rivers gave rise to the first civilization, Mesopotamia. The city-states in Mesopotamia began irrigating their lands using both rivers. Egypt, on the other hand, developed along the Nile River, which at the time was the longest river. Egyptians were an agrarian culture who utilized the fertile soil to expand their civilization. In other words, they were a civilization that focused primarily on agriculture. The Egyptian civilization was under the rule of kings or pharaohs. Utilizing enslaved people, they built pyramids for the sitting kings during their reign and for their afterlife. At the same time that Egyptian civilization was growing, the Fertile Crescent, an area northeast of Europe, the Sumerian city-states were developing their irrigation and flood systems. These flood systems were very important to their survival as they were able to harvest food for consumption. The Sumerians also created a system of writing called the cuneiform. Let's move forward now to the 1800s BCE, when the Sumerians were conquered by the Babylonians. Among the Babylonians was King Hammurabi. He is known for codifying laws. The Code of Hammurabi were a collection of 282 rules that established standards for commercial interactions and set fines to meet the requirements of justice. The Code of Hammurabi was carved into a huge stone and displayed publicly for the Babylonians to know and follow the laws. Ancient Greece's civilization developed around the sea instead of the river. Classic Greece did not follow any governmental laws, which did not unite them as a civilization. Instead, Sparta, warlike states, emerged to take over other city-states, which honestly, it puts a whole new meaning to the phrase, "This is Sparta" from the movie 300. But let's keep going. Okay, so remember that in Chapter 3, we learned about democracy and its beginnings. Well, democracy began in Athens, where some Athenian citizens could vote. Women and enslaved people were not allowed to vote. Classical Greek civilization was short-lived. However, their political ideas, architecture, and literature continued to influence the world. Greece's civilizations, like Sumerians, was also conquered by Philip II of Macedon and later on by the Romans. Rome's city began on the Italian peninsula and was governed by its wealthy citizens through an elected senate. Some of the laws that the Romans had in place influenced the United States beliefs. For example, the Romans believed that a person was innocent until proven guilty. Rome's power grew, and with that power, they were able to conquer many lands surrounding the Mediterranean Sea. The Romans built a strong infrastructure. They built schools, roads, bridges, hospitals, a tax system, and armies. We have focused on ancient civilizations in the eastern part of the world. Now let's travel back to the Americas and learn about ancient civilizations here. In the Americas, there were three major civilizations that have influenced how populations reside today. Ancient Maya was the strongest civilization from 300 to 900 and were centrally located in Central America. They are responsible for inventing the pictographic system. With this system, they record discoveries using mathematics and astronomy. The Inca Empire was built in South America. The Incas had a strong and sophisticated government system and built roads and bridges in mountains. The Aztecs were a civilization with roots in Mexico. They invented a written language and a calendar system. The Aztecs expanded their farmland by dredging mud from lakes. Despite the fall of the early civilizations, their inventions and technologies were passed down from generation to generations and ultimately have had an effect on current societies. Let's take a look at practice 1 found on page 479. At this time, complete the following questions based on information found on page 478. Welcome back. Let's go ahead and take a look at question 1. Which of the following Central American civilizations is particularly noted for achievements in both mathematics and astronomy? So let's look at our options. A, the Sumerians, B, the Maya, C, the Aztecs, or D, the Incas. So let's break it down. We know for a fact that the Sumerians were not located in Central America, so that leaves the Maya, Aztecs, and Incas as a possible answer. The Mayans invented the pictograph, which allowed them to record discovery using mathematics and astronomy. Ooh, I think we may have found our answer. But let's check out the rest of them. The Aztecs invented the calendar and a written language. I don't think this is the answer. And the Incas had a sophisticated form of government and built awesome bridges in the mountains. But again, I don't think this is the answer. So based on what we just recalled, it seems that our answer is B, the Maya. Let's answer question 3. What did the ancient civilization of Egypt and the Fertile Crescent have in common? A. Both developed flood control and irrigation technologies to boost food production. B. Both had a public code of law engraved in a huge stone. C. Both were centered on the shores of the Mediterranean Sea. D. Both developed systems of political democracy in which citizens could vote. Okay, so the Egyptian and Fertile Crescent civilizations developed near the river in order to take advantage of the water since they were an agrarian community. Remember, they harvested crops for survival. So knowing this, let's look at our options. So A sounds like a promising answer because they both use flood control and irrigation technology for food production. B, the Fertile Crescent civilizations were the only ones that had the Code of Hammurabi engraved in the stone, not the Egyptian civilization. C says both were centered on the shores of the Mediterranean Sea. Well, they were centered near the Nile, Tigris, and Euphrates River. The Greek civilizations were the ones that were centered in the Mediterranean Sea. So that's not correct. D, the both developed systems of political democracy in which citizens could vote. Well, we already know that the Athens were the ones that created a democracy system allowing some citizens to vote. Therefore, our answer is A. Both developed flood control and irrigation technologies to boost food production. At this time, pause the video, complete practice questions 2, 4 to 6, and click play when you are ready to continue. Let's move on to Lesson 2, Feudalism to Nation States. The Middle Ages began with Roman Empire weakening and becoming vulnerable to outside attacks. A tribal leader named Charlemagne invaded and conquered Europe by 800. Charlemagne was able to establish Europe by setting laws, spreading Christianity, and encouraging education and commerce. Upon Charlemagne's death, Europe became unstable and the system of feudalism emerged. Feudalism. Under feudalism, the nobles were given land by the king to control and to protect, and they oversaw the people or peasants who lived in the estate. The noble soldiers or knights were responsible to protect the monarchy's wealth. Another aspect of feudalism was the collection of taxes. The nobles collected taxes from the peasants, and in return, the nobles paid taxes to the king. Feudalism system was in place over several hundred of years, making European life the most peaceful that it had ever been. During the Middle Ages, to the east, the religion of Islam was forming under the command of the Prophet Muhammad. The followers of Islam were known as Muslims. They conquered large territories in the Middle East, Northern Africa, Spain, Persia, and India. They had conquered many empires, and those conquered converted to Islam, bringing their own personal knowledge and their arts to the Muslim culture. Even though the Islamic empire did not last, Islam and its culture has remained strong. During the late Middle Ages, Christians and Muslim Turks fought over the holy city Jerusalem in a series of wars called the Crusades. The Christians were victorious over the Turks, but they only ruled for 90 years. However, a lasting effect from the Crusades was commerce trading between Europe and the Middle East and China. As trade, money, and merchants grew in Europe, feudalism came to an end. People were moving to cities in search for better opportunities. Cities gained political, economic, and cultural importance. During the Middle Ages, European nations began to form as monarchs, which are combined territories of small rulers with wealth from the cities. England's monarchy was established by 1100. Under its monarch, France won the Hundred Years' War against England. Spain united through the marriage of King Ferdinand I of Aragon and Queen Isabella I of Castile. Here's an interesting fact. Did you know that Queen Isabella I was the one that founded Christopher Columbus's voyage to the New World? Interesting. A new movement was developing in Italy and moving across Europe between the 1300 and 1600. This movement was the Renaissance, which brought emphasis and growth to education, science, and the arts. The Renaissance had a lasting effect in the Catholic Church. During the Reformation period in the 1500s, reformers were unhappy about the church and abusing its power. They believed that they did not need the Pope to read them the Bible. Instead, they could read it themselves. These beliefs made them split from the Catholic Church, and form the Protestant religion. King Henry VIII of England broke its engagement with the Catholic Church and formed the Church of England, so he wouldn't have to obey the Pope. That was a lot of information. Let's use this information to answer practice 2. Practice 2 can be found on page 481. Complete the following questions based on information found on page 480 and 481. Question 1. According to the passage on 480, what was the role of the knights in feudal Europe? A. To collect taxes for the king. B. To take care of livestock. C. To protect their nobles' land from attack. D. To administer justice. Okay. So option A is to collect taxes for the king. We know that the nobles were the ones that collected taxes from the king, not the knights. B. To take care of livestock. Well, the passage did not say anything about the knights caring for the livestock, but we can infer that that was probably the job of the farmers or peasants. C. To protect their nobles' land from attack. So that seems like it falls under the purview of the knights, but let's keep going. To administer justice. Okay, so the knights did not administer justice. That was the role of the nobles. Therefore, our answer is C, to protect their nobles' land from attack. Let's read now question 2. Given the information on page 480, select the modern European nation in which you are most likely to find evidence of Muslim arts and culture. So if you look at the text on page 480, third paragraph, second sentence, it states, the followers of Islam, called Muslims, conquered large territories in the Middle East, Northern Africa, Spain, Persia, and India. Given the options that we have, the only place that we saw or that we read on the text from page 480, the answer is B, Spain. At this time, pause the video, complete practice questions 3 to 6, and click play when you are ready to continue. Let's move on to lesson 3, the age of revolutions. The age of revolutions have brought forth many changes to nations in order to have its citizens be fairly represented. As we mentioned in Chapter 2, the American Revolution came forth from the colonists' disagreements with the taxes that were levied on them and the lack of representation in Britain's parliament. Revolutionaries from France were inspired by the democratic ideas from the American colonies and the ideas mentioned in the Declaration of Independence and U.S. Constitution that they decided themselves to create the National Assembly in 1789. France was a monarch nation, which meant that they had complete power, and in comparison to England, they did not have a parliament. The National Assembly was a law-making body to represent the French people. King Louis XVI was very unhappy about this and fought against the National Assembly. This was the birth of the French Revolution, which lasted for 10 years. The concept of revolutions also began spreading to colonists in Latin America and Haiti. In Haiti, the enslaved were led by Toussaint Louverture to fight French rule and establish an independent nation in 1804. In Latin America, Mexican revolutionaries finally won their independence from Spain in 1821. Not all revolutions revolved around wars. The Industrial Revolution was an important event in the Americas as it led to the booming of manufacturing and production. The textile industry was booming in the 1700s as a result from new equipment to weave and thread cloth. With production being at its highest demand, warehouses focused on the steam engine for large-scale production and electricity. As we learned earlier, the Industrial Revolution was a turn in history that helped boost the economy. However, the Industrial Revolution also brought issues such as dangerous factory jobs, child labor, crowded cities, and pollution. A major change brought on by the Industrial Revolution was that of social change. European nations were primarily agrarian. However, after the Industrial Revolution, it brought the importance of manufacture and trade in comparison to agriculture. The merchant classes became more powerful, and new ideas about political equality affected how people thought about social equality. Let's move on to practice 3, found on page 483. At this time, complete the following questions based on information found on page 482 to 483. When you are ready to start, click play. Hello, welcome back. So let's answer question 1. According to the passage on page 482, which of the following had a great influence on the French Revolution? A. The Industrial Revolution. B. The Mexican Revolution. C. The U.S. Declaration of Independence. D. The British monarch. So let's break it down. A. The Industrial Revolution. Well, this one came after the French Revolution, and it focused on the effect of manufacturing. So A is not our answer. B. The Mexican Revolution. Well, the Mexican Revolution was inspired by the French and American Revolution. So this is also not our answer. C. The U.S. Declaration of Independence. Well, the beliefs in the U.S. Declaration of Independence encouraged the French to fight against the treatment they were receiving from monarch rule. So this may be a possible answer, but let's check out D. The British monarch. France was already under French monarch and they wanted to be free from it. So this was not an influence on the French Revolution. It seems that the correct answer is C. The U.S. Declaration of Independence. Let's move on to question 2. Which of the following statements is supported by the paragraph and the graph? So let's read the paragraph. Before the French Revolution, the French were divided into 3 groups by law, each with different privileges. In the first estate were the higher clergy, who were nobles, and the parish priests, who were commoners. The second estate consisted of nobles, who were not members of the clergy. The third estate was made up of commoners, including the middle class and peasants. So now let's look at our options. A. All members of the nobility belong to the first estate. B. The members of the first estate own more property than members of the second estate. C. The distribution of wealth in pre-revolutionary France favored the third estate. And D. Members of the third estate own the least amount of land. per person. So A, according to the paragraph accompanying this question, there were nobles in both the first and second estate. So this is not our answer. B, according to the graph again, members of the first estate own less property than those in the second estate. So B is also not our answer. C, according to the graph, wealth did not favor the third estate. So C is not our answer either. So let's look at D. By analyzing the graph, this seems to be correct, as the percentage of population was higher than the amount of land owned per person. Therefore, our answer is C. Members of the third estate own the least amount of land per person. At this time, pause the video, complete practice questions 3 to 6, and click play when you are ready to continue. We made it to lesson 4, exploration, colonialism, and wars. This lesson will be a refresher from the lessons discussed in chapter 2. We learned early on that World War I was a result from nationalism and imperialism. Pretty much what this means is the desire to have your needs meet because your nation is above other nations and wanting to extend your power and dominion over them. This strong desire led to military buildup. Serbia and Austro-Hungary were in a power struggle, and when Serbia assassinated an Austrian leader while visiting Serbia, war broke out. Other countries joined the war, separating themselves into two groups, the Central Power and the Allies. Ultimately, the Allies won. However, the war left Europe in devastation both structurally and financially. After the war, the Treaty of Versailles was signed in 1918. The Treaty of Versailles blamed Germany for the war and forced them to pay reparations to the Allies. At the same time that World War I was occurring, Russia was experimenting a revolutionary war. The Russian Tsar did not want to opt out of World War I, despite the lack of support from Russian citizens. Then in 1917, the Tsar and his family were murdered, and the Russian Revolution ended when Bolshevik leader Vladimir Lenin took control over Russia. Under his rule, he established the Soviet Union as communist nation, therefore forming the Communist Party. Further on, the Great Depression. Remember the Great Depression from chapter 2? Well, not only did it have negative effects in the United States, but also in European countries. One of the hardest hit countries was Germany. They were already struggling with the reparation payments from World War I, and the Great Depression. They saw more of their citizens become unemployed and famine spread across their nation. The leader of the Nazi Party, Adolf Hitler, rose to power at that time by promising to put people back to work and food on the table. Hitler's form of nationalism involved imprisoning and murdering people who were not part of the Aryan race. Jews were Hitler's main target, and this campaign of brutality against the Jews came to be known as the Holocaust. Hitler began conquering nations like Austria and Czechoslovakia, but when he wanted to invade Poland in 1939, England and France declared war on Germany, and World War II began. Once again, the Central Powers, formerly known as the Axis powers in World War I, which now included in Italy, were at war with the Allies. The war ended when the United States dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. After World War II, the Cold War started. Remember that the Cold War received its name because there was no actual fighting between the Soviet Union and the United States. It was a rather political and diplomatic war. Now, let's move on to practice 4, found on page 485. Complete questions 1 and 2 based on the information found on page 484. When you are ready to continue, click play. Welcome back. Let's look at question 1. As a result of the 1918 Treaty of Versailles, what did Germany have to do? A. Pay the Allies money to repair war damages. B. Develop its military forces to protect Europe. C. Adopt a community government. D. Promote nationalism among its people. So let's remember that after the World War I ended, there was the Treaty of Versailles that was signed. Pretty much it said that Germany was to blame for World War I and he had to pay the Allies for any damages. So the answer is A. Pay the Allies money to repair war damages. Let's look at question 2. What event was the immediate cause of England and France declaring war on Germany at the beginning of World War II? A. The annexation of Austria. B. The annexation of Czechoslovakia. C. The invasion of Poland. D. The invasion of France. So we know that Germany was allowed to annexate a couple of countries before he tried to annexate or before he tried to invade this other nation. So the Allies did not have a problem with Germany taking over Austria, and they did not have a problem taking over Czechoslovakia. However, England and France did have an issue when Germany tried to take over Poland, and that is when World War II started. Therefore, the answer is C, the invasion of Poland. At this time, pause the video, complete practice questions 3 to 6, and click play when you are ready to continue. Welcome back. We are now moving on to lesson 5, humans and the environment. During this lesson, the focus will be shifted to humans and its effects on the environment. Populations play an important role in the growth and movement of groups. Populations can be distinguished into two categories, native and migration. Natives are those who are native to a geographic area. For example, the Taino group was native to the Caribbean when Columbus arrived. Migration refers to a group of people who migrate from long distances in search of a better life and work opportunities. An example, it can be the Irish people migrating to the United States after the potato famine in the mid-1800s. The distribution of population across an area is dependent on factors such as resources, employment, favorable conditions, politics, climate, and economic development. Another factor that plays an important role in distribution of population is urban and rural development. Industrialized regions can see their population shift away from rural areas into cities and towns. With an increase in urban areas, there is also an increase in suburban development. As cities become crowded, they expand to agricultural lands, taking them over to use for housing and commercial development. Agriculture also changes in most industrialized regions because farming is done on a larger scale with the use of machinery and using less people. Industrialized populations are able to support a large population. However, these regions also lose their distinctive cultural traits. Another important factor is political boundaries. This can be seen when groups are in dispute with each other and constantly at war. An example of this was seen after World War II, when Europe was depopulated of millions of Jews and were forced to resettle in the Middle East. Another example is the continuous conflicts within the Middle East, which has shifted the population of the Arabs and Jews. With the increase of population, the natural environment can be negatively affected. Both manufacturing and urbanization causes air and water pollution. Commercial agriculture degrades the soil and water, endangering any surplus. To put everything into perspective, let's think about China. China was predominantly a farmland population. However, they lost most of their land due to urbanization. As a result, the Chinese government has been trying to impose policies or laws to reduce population growth. Despite the ongoing governmental policies and international agreements, the efforts to reduce the destructive impact of growing populations, large cities, and damaging agricultural methods has been fruitless. Let's look at practice 5, located on page 487. Complete questions 1 and 2 based on the information found on page 486. When you are ready to continue, press play. Let's look at question 1. What is migration? A. A form of society in which people move on after they consume an area's resources. B. Temporarily travel to another geographic region to scout for resources. C. The move of an individual or population from one geographic area to settle in another. D. The relative distribution of populations in urban and rural areas. So we talked about migration early on, and we talked about how the Irish population migrated to the United States during the potato famine in the 1800s. So based on that information, we can infer that the answer is C, the move of an individual or population from one geographic area to settle in another. In this case, the Irish population moved from Ireland to the United States. Question 2. Migration within a country's borders is called internal migration. Which of the following is an example of internal migration? A. The movement of the Irish to the United States during the potato famine in the 1800s. B. The westward movement of the American population from the 1700s to the present. C. The movement of Mexican workers into the Southwest United States during the 1900s. Or D. The movement of people from former British colonies to Great Britain. So we know that internal migration is when they move within the country's borders. So let's look at A again. So A is talking about the movement from the Irish to the United States. So that already tells me that that is not an internal migration because they're talking about two different countries. B, the westward movement of the American population from the 1700s to the present. So that aligns with the internal migration because they are talking just within the country of America. C, the movement of Mexican workers into the Southwest United States in 1900. Again, with this answer, they are talking about two different countries, which is Mexico and the United States. And then D, the movement of former British colonies to Great Britain. They are also talking about different countries. So therefore, the best answer for our question is B, the westward movement of the American population from the 1700s to the present. At this time, pause the video, complete practice questions 3 to 6, and click play when you are ready to continue. Bear with me, we are almost there. This is our last lesson in this chapter. Lesson 6, Using Resources Wisely. In order to understand how to use our resources wisely and efficiently, we first need to know what are natural resources. Conservation is the use of natural resources in a responsible and careful manner. These resources are soil, plants, animals, water, air, and mineral reserves. In order to keep these resources around for years to come, we are encouraged to sustain them by using renewable resources versus non-renewable. Renewable resources are resources that can be replenished by the human hand or by nature. For example, wood is a renewable resource because we can plant trees in order to harvest wood again. Non-renewable resources are resources that do not renew themselves and humans do not have the ability to renew them. For example, coal and petroleum. Natural resources are critical to the existence of human population. Natural resources also provide an economic opportunity to build the nation's economy. We use resources to produce goods and services that offer value. For example, petroleum provides us with the fuel to run equipment in our vehicles, and trees provide us with wood to build homes, make paper, and furniture. Another reason to reassure the continuation of our natural resources is the conservation of the Earth's ecosystem. The Earth houses many types of lives, human, plant, and animal, and it is ultimately our responsibility to ensure their survival for many generations to come. When natural resources decrease or become scarce, conflicts arise between groups of people because their interest in survival is threatened. In order to ensure the survival rate of the ecosystem, many countries have put into effect laws that protect the Earth's biodiversity. Biodiversity is defined as the entirety and diversity of all living things. Species that are on the verge of becoming endangered are highly guarded and protected because their species are becoming extinct. When they become extinct, they are gone forever, like the dodo bird. So how can we keep our Earth clean and healthy? As mentioned earlier, some countries have established laws to protect the endangered species. Other laws focus on protecting the ozone layer, which protects the Earth from outrageous climate changes. And other times, it is up to humans to find and create other sources of renewable energy, such as solar and wind energy, to maintain a healthy Earth for future generations. Now, let's look at practice 6, located on page 489. At this time, complete questions 1 and 2 based on the information found on page 488. Question 1. What are renewable resources? A. Materials that will never run out or can be replaced if used. B. Materials that we do not use and so we can use at a later date. C. Materials that we use but we cannot replace. D. An incentive to conserve materials. If you read paragraph 1, second sentence, you can see that a renewable resource is a resource that is sustained through replacement. Therefore, by knowing this, we know that the answer is A, materials that will never run out or can be replaced if used. Let's look at question 2. Which of the following is an example of the sustainable use of a resource? A, burning fossil fuels. B, strip mining. C, overgrazing livestock. D, rotating crops. Remember that a sustainable resource, the sustainable use of a resource is using resources in ways that do not exhaust themselves for the future. It seems that with all of our options, the only possibility is rotating crops. Why? Because farmers plant different crops throughout different seasons in order to conserve the nutrients in the soil. The other examples A, B, and C, they are non-sustainable. At this time, pause the video, complete practice questions 3 through 7, and click play when you are ready to continue. Congratulations! You have made it through Unit 3, Social Studies. Next, we will start Unit 4, Science, Chapter 1, Science Practices.